Andy, I'm home. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
It's official. The Wall Street Journal reporting today that the Energy Department, joining the FBI in their assessment, has now concluded that a lab leak is indeed the most likely origin of the global COVID pandemic. This is based on new intelligence reports and crucially involves the assessment of the national laboratories, which are part of the Department of Energy. Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. You heard it here first, as we were the first on television to lay all this out more than 2 years ago. It was dismissed as a conspiracy theory, but now, thanks to this new assessment, our original reporting has been vindicated. Remember, this is not just about the leak itself and the cover-up afterwards. We must hold the Chinese regime accountable for that. Even more important is this point. What were they working on in that lab and why? The answer, gain-of-function virus enhancement that was not just funded by Fauci, but commissioned by him. And as we reported in January 2021, he broke Obama and Trump administration rules to do it. Fauci, more than any other person or organization, is the one who must be held accountable. Joining us now, someone who is rightly fired up about this and put out an incredibly strong statement as soon as this news broke today. Newly announced 2024 presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, great to see you. We'll talk about your presidential message in a moment, but just your reaction to this news today.
So this is out of a dystopian science fiction novel, Stephen. You're right. You were among the very first on this. The very research that was conducted to supposedly prevent a global pandemic actually created one. And I think there are two prongs of accountability here. One is accountability for China and for the CCP, which tried to sweep this under the rug. And this will not go lightly. The U.S. needs to lead the way in holding China accountable. But we only have moral standing to hold China accountable if we hold those accountable here at home that purposefully evaded U.S. constraints on gain-of-function research to anyway go through the back door and do it abroad anyway. And I think that accountability starts at home. Then we have the foundation to deliver accountability to the Chinese Communist Party. And it's also a lesson in free speech and open debate, having prevented us from getting to this answer sooner. If we don't learn from our mistakes, we're just going to keep repeating them. That's the lesson of today.
It's an incredibly strong message that you put out on this today, and I've just echoed there. One particular thing I want to highlight from your longer statement today was that you talked about criminal prosecutions for those responsible for that second part, those who broke rules to push forward this research. Of course, Fauci prominent amongst them. You could put in there Francis Collins, head of the NIH. Could you elaborate on that, the criminal aspect here?
Yes, and I think here the facts are going to depend on whether there was intentionality, but I think there's good reasons for there to be a criminal investigation opened into this matter of whether these federal officials knowingly skirted a federal prohibition on a form of research that they wanted to conduct anyway. Many of them were on the record objecting to this restraint on federal research. But this reveals really what's going on in the United States today, Steve. The people who we elect to run the government are not the ones who actually run the government. The real people who run the show make their own decisions anyway. And it appears what happened here is that they then privately used government money and public funds to be able to fund the same sort of research that the U.S. banned here in the U.S. to do it through the back door abroad. If that was done intentionally, I think that is grounds for criminal liability. And I think that there needs to be, and this is a global pandemic, millions of people have died. If there's any occasion for really delivering accountability, starting here at home, I think this is the example for it. And I also think we cannot go lightly with respect to China, who similarly has lied about this for a very long time. But I think accountability on both sides of the Pacific is crucial.
What a perfect way of setting that out, Vivek. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of our conversation. By the way, I just want to mention to our audience that we've got Brad Wenstrup joining us next week, who's chair of the new coronavirus committee, and we'll be talking to him about all this as well. But now we're going to get to the broader political conversation. We'll talk to Vivek about that on the other side of this. The brilliant thing about this Biden administration is that if for a brief moment you forget just how appalling they really are and why, they find a way to remind you, and sure enough, they did it again this week, as we saw the grotesque contrast between the Biden fantasy of blue-collar Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and the wretched reality of a weak, cynical machine politician completely controlled by donors and activists, ignoring the horrific poisoning of an entire working-class community in East Palestine, Ohio, and instead flying halfway around the world for a photo op designed to steal the valor of brave Ukrainians fighting a war that Biden himself enabled with his weakness and appeasement of Putin. Astonishingly, back home, all we got from Biden on one of the worst toxic chemical spills in America in years was this pathetic tweet thread full of lies and deflections. He claimed the derailment was somehow Trump's fault because his administration deregulated certain brake requirements. But according to Biden's own NTSB, brakes had nothing to do with the derailment, and it was most likely caused by an overheated axle. Biden said the EPA ordered Norfolk Southern to pay for the cleanup because it's their mess. Of course, that's true of the derailment, but the much more consequential issue was the decision afterwards to pour toxic chemicals into an open ditch and set them on fire. A move that, according to industry experts, was totally unprecedented and reckless, but approved by the Biden administration. How do we know that? Biden himself told us.
You know, we were there 2 hours after the train went down. 2 hours. I've spoken with every single major figure in both Pennsylvania and in Ohio.
Oh, they were there within 2 hours. By the way, aren't you surprised we didn't have a little moment of demented, angry Biden there? 2 hours! Not 10, 2! According to Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, even Biden's Defense Department was actively involved in the decision to pour and burn the toxic chemicals. As we said last week, DeWine himself must be held accountable. But it's completely outrageous for Biden to try and distance his administration by blaming others, while at the same time bragging about how involved his administration was from the start. As usual, these people who lecture us about ethics and decency are desperate to evade responsibility. Now, it's hard to believe that what you're going to see is real and not a deepfake, but apparently this genuinely was America's Transportation Secretary this week as the nation reels from devastating train accidents, catastrophic air traffic control meltdowns, and almost daily reports of terrifying aircraft near misses.
I'm going to refer you to the comments that I made to the press because right now I'm taking some personal time and I'm walking down the street.
Oh, he's taking some personal time. Seems to have become something of a habit in the midst of a crisis that falls within his purview. When Mackenzie Pete did finally make it to East Palestine, we instantly knew just how serious he was by the fact that he wore a hard hat and ignored every question reporters asked about his sluggish response. But it's okay, because somebody self-identifying as Pete's press person did have all the answers.
Mayor Pete, why did it take you an entire 2.5 weeks to actually get here to respond to East Palestine? Will you apologize to the residents of this city for the slow response, to the government's slow response? Do you have any apology? Sure. So can we ask, well, if you're the press secretary of the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, don't you think you should be able to ask questions from the American public that you serve?
Absolutely. I would like to do it without the camera on.
Can I ask why?
I think that is a little bit aggressive. That's why.
Brilliant. Expecting the federal government that you pay for to answer questions about issues they're responsible for is now aggressive. Of course, the reason they're so discombobulated by all this is that Trump showed up, was welcomed by cheering crowds, and demonstrated yet again that he has a natural, authentic connection with working people and blue-collar communities like East Palestine. And honestly, you just have to love moments like this. I mean, I do, because I love McDonald's, not least because working there was my first job.
So I know this menu better than you do. Okay? I probably know it better than anybody in here.
The serious point is that Biden's response to what happened in East Palestine highlights some of the defining defects of his administration. Creating a problem, denying it exists, finally admitting it exists, but blaming others, and then either doing too little too late to help, or more often making the problem even worse. Of course, we saw that in Afghanistan. We see it still, every day, at the border. And we'll continue to see it with the economy, where they helped create the inflation surge with their reckless spending, claimed it was transitory when it was obvious that it wasn't, blamed Putin, and then decided to spend even more, making sure that it lasts longer, and the high interest rates needed to control it cause even more pain. Honestly, what's gone well? They claim low unemployment, but even there, first, it's the inevitable bounce back from the pandemic lockdowns, which they supported, and second, the Labour participation rate, the actual proportion of Americans working, as we always remind you, is now the lowest for nearly 50 years. Amazingly, there's no sign of a rethink, even though more than 70% of Americans think we're heading in the wrong direction. Instead, Biden and his crew are heading further and faster in the wrong direction. Look at this extreme and menacing executive order Biden issued last week. They want to embed the woke equity agenda into all aspects of the federal government through artificial intelligence. Doesn't AI already have enough left-wing bias? ChatGPT, created by Biden donors, and now the default technology for Microsoft's Bing search engine, refuses to compose an argument in favor of fossil fuels because it goes against Democrat climate zealotry. And while it will gladly write a story about Trump being corrupt, it refuses to do the same for Biden. Amazingly, they really do seem to be serious about running this senile laughingstock all over again in 2024. As Dr. Jill confirmed on Friday in an announcement that should be treated with the reverence and respect that it deserves. So please, put down what you're doing and pay attention as we recite the words of Dr. Jill. And I think, look at all that Joe has done, has accomplished. I mean, he brought us out of the chaos. And he did that. People were starving. They didn't have food. And people were afraid. There was such fear. And so he came up with the American Rescue Plan to help kids get back to schools. And you know, the things that bringing broadband to all the United States so that all kids have internet. Look at our roads and our bridges. Look at healthcare and what we've done. He's done so much. And Darlene, he's just not done. Well, tell us what you think of all that on the new free Twitter at TrevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. Vivek is back with us. Vivek, hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. What is your critique now, thinking of your big announcement this week, your critique of this administration and how an administration that you now hope to lead would be different and better?
Well, I think this administration is a symptom of a deeper cancer in America, which is an anti-meritocratic cancer. The people running the show in America today are not the people who meritocratically should be there. Either Joe Biden, but even if you think about, you were talking about Pete Buttigieg. Would he have gotten that job if he were not gay and wear it on his sleeve? Absolutely not. Would Kamala Harris, who was supposed to be responsible for the crisis at the border, gotten her job if it were not for her gender and the color of her skin? Absolutely not. And I think this is just a symptom of a deeper cancer invading every sphere of American life. What we really need to do in our country is restore the idea that you get ahead in America not on the color of your skin, not on your sexuality, but on the content of your character and your contributions. And while I think a big part of that is in the private sector, it's a big part of why ending affirmative action is a top policy pillar of mine, including in government, it's also restoring merit to government itself. Because as I said before, Steve, it's not the people who we even elect who are actually running the show. As much of a joke as Joe Biden really is sitting in the Oval Office, the deeper problem is that the people underneath him view him just as a puppet as well. And the administrative state that sits underneath him, they're the ones who actually wield power poorly on his behalf.
You know what I love about everything you're saying tonight is you really zero in on the crucial problem. In a moment, we've got some questions for you from that I asked from our audience on Twitter today, but just one from me, just to follow up on what you said there. Specifically, what would you want to do about the administrative state?
I would shut most of it down, Steve. I mean, I've already committed publicly. The first department I'm going to shut down, I'm going to do it in week 1 in office, is the U.S. Department of Education. But that is just the first of many. When these agencies become such a cancerous rot, you can't reform them top down. You have to shut them down. I'm also going to replace these federal civil service protections. That's anti-meritocratic, saying you can't fire somebody no matter how bad of a job they do. That doesn't work in the private sector. It shouldn't work in government either. To replace that with 8-year term limits for saying that, you know what, if I can't be the next president of the United States for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, I don't think most people working for me in the federal bureaucracy should either. And take a bunch of those administrative agencies in Washington, D.C., and get them out of Washington, D.C., back to the people they're actually supposed to be accountable to. Think about if the Department of Transportation was located in East Palestine, what kind of different reaction we might have had. And so I'm just beginning to scratch the surface, Steve, but as you can tell, I'm pretty animated about this because it is my top domestic priority to actually decimate the administrative state and restore a 3-branch government, not a 4 or 5-branch government as we have today, between the alphabet soup of the administrative state and the private sector that they're increasingly deputizing to do their dirty work. That's the real problem.
It's that is a really deep point. That is the structural point that underlies all these other problems. I'm so glad you're focused on it. Now let's move to some of the questions that came in for you today. A couple of them, I'm just picking them because they represented a lot of what our audience had to ask you. This is from Matt Sanchez. Why is he challenging Trump? Why doesn't he support Trump and push for a cabinet or White House job when Trump wins?
So it's a great question. First of all, I want to say President Trump is a friend. I don't even see myself as running against him. I am running for the country. And to be really honest about it, if he hadn't done what he did in 2015 and 2016 as an outsider, then I probably wouldn't have thought about doing what I am today. He sets a high bar, in my opinion. But I am running to exceed that high bar, to take the America First agenda to the next level. Because in order to put America first, Steve, we have to first rediscover what America is. And that is why I'm running, because it's not somebody else's vision. It is my vision. You and I know this for years, discussing on this show, the books I've written over the last couple of years. This is my vision for the country, centered on answering the question of what it means to be an American today. I think President Trump's actually misunderstood. I think he actually does care about national unity, but I think national unity is so important that we need to ask ourselves, who is actually going to deliver it going forward? And I am running for president to deliver on that mission with a vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes the woke agenda to irrelevance, not just pounding it into the ground with a hammer. Even I've done some of that. But now we need to move forward and actually dilute it with a national identity of a sense of what it means to be American. And I think that's what we're missing. And I believe that's what I can deliver.
So there's one more I'd like to put to you. It's from a friend of ours, Susan Shelley. It's more of a personal question, but I think these sometimes can illustrate a deeper point. So I'd like to see your response to this. In your career or in your personal life, have you ever been fooled or misled by experts? And if so, how did that experience affect your thought process and judgment when making decisions today?
The answer to that question is yes. I have run multiple companies, and I think that it's opened my eyes to the fact that while you need expert input, there's a difference between a policy decision that's made by a leader and a technocratic input that's offered by a so-called expert. And I think we live in a moment today in America that mixes up the two. We live in this managerial technocracy, which professes science or whatever other technocratic value is on the table, to say that actually guides a policy decision, whether that's COVIDism, whether that's climatism. I collectively call that scientism rather than science. That is a religion. And we need to unshackle ourselves from this religion that says that the technocrat actually gets to run the show, in order to instead have leaders. I was trained as a molecular biologist myself. I've run multi-billion-dollar businesses. I'm bluntly financially sophisticated. I understand those expert inputs. You need leaders who can, but you need to be leaders, also have leaders who can separate the actual policy judgment, the moral judgments they're making from the technical judgments, because they're not one and the same. I'm so grateful for that question, because it goes to the heart of an American cancer today that has turned technocracy itself into a religion. And the most dangerous religions are the ones that we fail to recognize are actually religions, Steve.
A very, very powerful set of answers to all those questions, Vic. We really appreciate you being with us tonight. All right, now just a couple of minutes for reaction from our friend Jason Chaffetz. Jason, what do you think?
He makes a lot of sense. These puppeteers that are helping to run the country, I really do worry about them. I really think that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and some of these others they're just, who are the puppeteers that are running them? It's this bureaucracy. We should get rid of the Department of Education. And in your monologue, Steve, I think you really hit it on the head. I think the cabinet reflects the boss, and the boss is slow-witted. He's not nimble. He's feeble. He believes in a weak America. and we're suffering the consequences of this. I mean, look at on day one, they shut down the Keystone Pipeline. And then you go move forward and all the energy policy, he goes over to Ukraine and talks about how he wants strong energy for Ukraine. What about strong energy for the United States of America? You've been dismantling that, Mr. President.
It is absolutely amazing. I know. Thank you, Jason. That's all the time we have now, but the good news is there's more for you later in the show, so stick around. We'll see.
What we do here is go back.